The very first patient that was treated on our trial gave the drug, and they came in after one cycle. It's given once every 3 weeks. And they came in after 3 weeks, and the disease had they had been advancing so fast, they were metastasizing so fast that they came in that after 3 weeks, and the disease was way worse. So it's all over. I mean, the momentum was still going, right? And we had a conversation, and we continued to treat them because there was no other options, right, for them. And when they came in after that second cycle, that was when we got a call, and it was like, a bunch of these tumors are gone. And as that became more evident, as more patients responded to the drug, as we started to hear more from this, it's such as a scientist, I don't know that there's a greater feeling than being able to move that there.
Jake, welcome to Transcribed. Thanks for doing this.
Hey man, I'm excited to be here. This is cool.
Let's go back in time. Strand was started in 2017. I sometimes think that the world's collectively forgotten that mRNA wasn't always a thing. It wasn't always a proven modality. It wasn't that long ago that there was a lot of skepticism around its potential as a medicine. Take us back to the founding and developing mRNA technology during your PhD. Like, how did you know you're onto something? And what was the turning point where you thought it could be a company?
So, the entire reason that I went to do a PhD, right, was this fundamental belief about where genetic medicine was going, right? Where we were going with our ability to deliver new genes and different sorts of therapies. Right before I got to MIT, the CRISPR papers came out, right? From Feng Zhang and Jennifer Doudna's labs. And that came out. I was like, wow, what a cool technology. It's definitely going to need to be delivered. And so I went to MIT with this idea that I would become a professor, and I would work on, I had done a summer in Bob Langer's lab actually as an undergrad. And then I came back to MIT and I thought, Bob's got this beautiful job, right? He gets to do science. He gets to spin it out into the science goes out into the world. It's really great. When I got to MIT and found out what academia really was like for 99.99% of even MIT professors, right? Most of them aren't Bob Langer.
Yep. There's only
you see
one.
A different world of like where the gaps are in what can happen and how science is going to get out to the world. And so when I saw mRNA, I thought this was a technology that had all of this potential. There was actually a startup upstairs from my lab that had just come out of stealth. It was called Moderna, because we were right off campus.
I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah. A few people have heard of them, right?
Yeah.
And so we were working on messenger RNA, and we were thinking about, okay, Moderna's got a great start, right? They have this called modified RNA technology. Them and BioNTech were developing this really beautiful technology for vaccines. And we thought the big gap now is going to be, how are we going to deliver it to these other areas of the body? And so that's just what I started working on as a scientist, right? No idea of starting a company, no idea what starting a company was. I thought maybe if we do something interesting, maybe Moderna will take the elevator down here and they'll be like, hey, give us this technology and here's some money. And then, I don't know, then you retire at 25 years old. I don't really know what you do, right? You just do science. What ended up happening in 2017 is we realized we were really on to something, and we could begin to unlock this lever point on what we thought was the future of genetic medicines. And so we began pitching this company where I would say, well, we are mRNA 2.0. We are next generation messenger RNA. And so many investors were like, I'm not even convinced there's a 1.0, right? Like, it was very much like, how are you starting a next gen mRNA company when there hasn't been a first gen mRNA company?
So investors are pretty skeptical.
It took me 18 months, I think, to raise our seed round.
Okay. 2017.
Not that I knew. Yeah, we founded in 2017 and we got funded in early 2019.
Okay.
So
wow. Okay.
There is we incorporated the company around October to December of 2017. And then 2018 was like me trying to figure out how to fundraise. And I'm not from that world, right? I didn't really go to SF a whole lot. I didn't know what Silicon Valley was like. I didn't know what investors wanted to see. Like, my original pitch deck was literally basically my thesis defense. Like I was, and I've looked at it. It's so bad. It's so incredibly bad. Like, because the pitch is essentially all of the technology that we had developed, and then me going, so you see it,
right?
And it was like, look, we could program mRNA to do this. We could program it to do that, and we could do it. And none of it, even with any applications. I was like, and we're going to use this in cancer, and then we're going to do more things. And people were like,
what?
I mean, cool. Like really nice.
It was a science project.
It was a science project.
Yeah.
Like in my head, it was clear what we needed to work on, but I had no idea how to like boil that down
and tell a story around it.
To tell a story around it. In my mind, everyone just would sort of get it like we did.
Sounds like it took a lot of time to raise that first round. You know, first time founder, probably lots of technology risk. Like, how'd you convince investors? Who was the first to believe in? What do you think they saw?
I think the investor that ended up leading the round was this group, Playground Global, Jory Bell, partner there.
Okay, so you went to Silicon Valley, actually.
Yeah, we tried to go here first. And we were laughed out of most offices. I mean, people who took time most people weren't overtly rude to us. But I was like 26, and it's, not exactly, your typical biotech CEO. This is pre people making a push around founder-led biotech as well. This is, it was a lot of, you're not in remotely the decade of where you can be the CEO of this company. And there was a lot of that, which, was fine. We went to Silicon Valley for sort of two reasons. One was an embracing of, founder, platform, leadership, big ideas, big if true ideas. Let's try to de-risk it. And the second was, really around like this technology is going to be a different approach, right? Everyone within genetic medicines, everyone recognizes that delivery is a problem. Mm-hmm. And so they want to solve it with novel delivery solutions. And our pitch was a little bit different. Our pitch was delivery is a problem, except let's think about what we want to deliver. What we want to deliver is the protein that the mRNA makes at the end of the day, right? The mRNA I don't really care about. It's a means to an end. Sure. Inside the cell, I want this protein to be produced, and I want the biodistribution of that protein to be protein in the cells and the tissues that I want it in, and none of it in the cells that I don't want it in. And so that actually, from a first principles perspective, it gives you a secondary, it's delivery plus expression. And if you can control expression, then you essentially control the protein delivery. Mm-hmm. That, to this day, still really annoys some more traditional thinking biotech and pharma folks. Like I see it all the time where folks are like, yeah, but the mRNA is going all over. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't care.
Who cares? Yeah.
Who cares, right? The mRNA is getting degraded. It's non-toxic. Mm-hmm. We're doing all these studies. So this is a way to solve this issue that people have been literally banging their head against the wall for 20 plus years, first in silencing RNA and now in messenger RNA. We've just not been able to crack the specificity of that delivery. And so we were trying to showcase that idea. It just wasn't well received because it was very new. It was a new idea. 26-year-old CEO trying to explain why that they could do it. I was still in graduate school. Like I was still enrolled at MIT. I hadn't defended yet. I was finishing up I was writing a paper on this that ended up going into Nature Chemical Biology. And, we were just started getting off the ground with a pitch deck that was truly awful. And so it took...
Maybe we can get a copy of that and put it in the show notes.
I've tried to bury it. I've deleted it all out of my email. I think with... one of the reasons I think Playground was such a good partner, and one of the reasons I think that worked out is they're a venture firm that's like deeply technical. Mm-hmm. All of the partners are deeply technical. They have they're former Google executives and they're former deep tech executives, and they take a lot of time to try to understand things. And because of that, they were able to sort of see the forest for the trees, right? See what was under the hood.
So what did it feel like to make a bet on some technology very early before it was proven? Like, was there a moment where things flipped and everyone believed in mRNA? Like, did the pandemic just kind of fix everything? Where everyone's like, yeah, of course, mRNA. Yeah.
It's what I imagine people who have been in like AI and machine learning for the past 10 years must feel like the last few years, where, it goes from you're working on what to like your grandmother is like, asking you questions about it, right?
That must feel pretty good.
It's very surreal at first, right? I mean, so I'll give you an example. When I was 24, I grew up in rural Illinois. My family, we traveled to like Disney World and stuff. I never left the country. I didn't have a passport. And I met Ugur Sahin, who's a founder of BioNTech, and Kati Kariko, who was SVP at BioNTech, now is a Nobel Prize winner. And I met them at an mRNA conference. And we had snuck our poster up. Tasuku, my co-founder, and I had snuck our poster into the poster session and hung it up in the poster session at this industry conference.
You snuck it in?
Well, we just there was just an extra poster board. So we just hung it up and then stood in front of it during the poster session. And so we're standing there, and Ugur and Kati come up and they're talking to us, and then we sit down and we end up having dinner. There's a dinner afterwards, and we're talking, and there's this photo that's taken of the four of us, and I'm like really young looking. Both of us are young looking, and they invited us to BioNTech to give a seminar on messenger RNA. So this is like January of 2015, right? So I know these people. I spent time with them. I've been to BioNTech, and then all of a sudden, there's a pandemic and it's very weird, and then we're all locked in our houses, and Moderna and BioNTech are like, we're going to make a vaccine, and everyone's the biotech industry was like mobilized, right? We were doing everything: therapeutics, vaccines, preventatives, anti-infective, like everything we could think of. And then, as time went on, the mRNA vaccines, right, they emerged as this like faster, more efficient solution. And all of a sudden, these people I know are being interviewed by Anderson Cooper. Right?
Yeah.
And we're all stuck in our house at the same time. I'm just stuck in my house, watching TV. It was a very surreal moment. My grandmother, actually, I remember talking to her, and she was saying, Jake, do you know anything about this mRNA thing? And I was like, yeah, my thesis. I gave you a copy of my thesis.
You didn't read it, Grandma?
Yeah. You didn't read it? It was just it was a really weird environment. But I think for me, all it did was it accelerated the inevitable, right?
Yeah.
mRNA was going to come as a future cornerstone of medicine.
Sure. COVID just pulled it up.
COVID pulled that timeline up, and it made it, and obviously shoved it into the forefront of society.
I think that must have been really validating for you and your team. So it's been 8 years since Strand was founded. You now have positive phase 1 results. I saw the data that you presented at ASCO. It was really, really impressive stuff. Congratulations. Can you tell me more about just the journey to go from starting to having dosed patients and made an impact in their lives? And were there ever times it seemed like the program wouldn't work?
Yeah. There's all sorts of times like that. I guess to take it from a scientist perspective, despite being a CEO, I think about myself first and foremost as a scientist. Every day we go to work and I work with our scientists. I'd say there's no bigger professional joy just a huge takeaway that I've ever had in my professional career than being able to see science from the earliest ideation of literally pipette in hand, working on that science on the bench, and taking that all the way into a patient that was in need that we then helped. Right?
Yeah, these were patients who had no other option, right?
Yeah, so we went in, it's a phase 1 first in human trial in cancer, in solid tumor oncology. So what you're getting is, our protocol stipulates that it's patients who are refractory. They don't have, they've at least failed the standard of care. But in reality, a doctor's not going to put a patient on this, first in human experimental drug until all other options have been exhausted. Essentially, it's
last
go
resort.
to hospice and call it and just make you as comfortable as possible, or it's, hey, we take one more shot, probably won't work, but you'll contribute to science maybe. This sort of the pitch for a lot of these patients. And the very first patient that was treated on our trial, we gave the drug, and they came in after one cycle. It's given once every 3 weeks. And they came in after 3 weeks, and the disease they had been advancing so fast, they were metastasizing so fast that they came in that after 3 weeks, and the disease was way worse. So it's all over. The momentum was still going, right? And we had a conversation, and we continued to treat them because there was no other options, right, for them. And when they came in after that second cycle, that was when we got a call, and it was like, a bunch of these tumors are gone. And we sort of, I remember I was sitting in the Natick Mall on a Sunday with, it was
I
like,
won't ask what you're doing at the Natick Mall. Hanging out
it
with
was too
sons.
hot, and we were just trying to get my newborn son out of the house to walk around. So we're walking around the Natick Mall on a Sunday just because it's air conditioned and you can walk, and and we're sitting there, and I get this call, and I'm like, oh my God. And as that became more evident, as more patients responded to the drug, as we started to hear more from this, it's such a, as a scientist, I don't know that there's a greater feeling than being able to move that there. But that drug that's now, advancing into the clinical trials, expanding into a phase 2 now, and looking at, accelerated approval pathways to get to patients in need. That drug, multiple times people have hated on it, right? It's like, oh, it's it's the same mechanism as we've seen before. It's just new because you're using mRNA, and we don't care. And it was really hard to get certain investors excited about it because we always believe that the devil's in the details, right? It's not that cytokines don't work, it's that we haven't delivered them correctly. And now with mRNA, we have a better approach to deliver these signaling molecules, for instance. And there was data throughout time that will we be able to manufacture this drug? The mRNA is complicated to make. There's so many different small stutter steps, and then throw into the fact that we had all of these manufacturers that we were trying to line up for mRNA manufacturing at the same time that the mRNA industry went from maybe making 1,000 doses a year for a few clinical trials to making 10 billion, vaccinating the entire world. So every raw material was just zapped up out of existence.
Oh, you couldn't. So it's not that there was a bunch of capacity you could use. It's that you couldn't get anyone to.
It was both. It was both. It was like the components were sucked up. The capacity was taken out. Plus, Defense Production Act was rolled out to where even if we had contracts signed, if they needed to make vaccines, they could kick us out. So we're manufacturing this drug, and every place is like, hey, sorry, there's excess capacity needed for the COVID vaccines.
I'm guessing you weren't thinking about the Defense Production Act taking your manufacturing capacity when you're starting a company. It's definitely not on the bingo card of things that could go wrong.
When you design for your board, what are the risks and opportunities here? And you don't think about manufacturing production app. You don't think about the fact that I think one of the components of most lipid nanoparticles had such an immature market because the only real market was Onpattro, which was Alnylam's drug, and then some experimental clinical programs for Moderna, BioNTech, and other mRNA research reagents. And it was one family-owned company in rural Germany that produced this component.
Wow.
And because there just wasn't demand for it.
Sure,
they were already making it, and they just no one needed any more than what they made, and they weren't that critical. It wasn't, that competitive or anything. It wasn't a huge margin, but all of a sudden went from 1,000, 10,000 doses a year of all mRNA demand to, hey, we need to vaccinate 6 to 7 billion people. And the markets went crazy. You couldn't get raw materials. You couldn't
Sure, and all these little companies no one's ever heard of become the most important bottleneck in the supply chain.
So much, right? And it was really crazy.
Wow. Many founder, I'd say Strand's very unusual. Many founder-led biotechs have definitely struggled to survive and advance. And what do you think's enabled Strand to break through and deliver and so spectacularly, I think, to date? And what advice do you have to give to other founders so they, what can they learn from the Strand journey?
I think the biotech drug development industry as a startup ecosystem is in massive need of intergenerational leadership, right? So we have these two camps that have sort of sprung up over the last 6 years where there's you can only be a biotech CEO if you've been a biotech CEO, and you have to work with one of these 25 investors, and you have to be a 55-year-old man with gray hair. And you have that camp. It's an exaggeration, but you have this camp of founders can do anything they set their mind to, and visionaries are visionaries, and everyone is Steve Jobs, and we should back all of them. And we always saw ourselves as this, I thought there were things that East Coast style biotech companies did super well, and there was an institutional leadership there that it just was unmatched in terms of the investors and the executives and all of these people. And there's things that getting behind singular visions and bold ideas and that West Coast style of like back the founder, back the vision really did well. And we sort of situated ourselves here in Boston, right, as we spun out of MIT. And we took a lot of investment from the West Coast, and we tried to ideologically be a blend of both worlds. And what I went out of my way to do early on was to make connections with a lot of these folks from that biotech world. I think that, when I look at the tech industry, I see so much intergenerational leadership where either former founders become partners at, like former operators and founders become partners at the funds and then invest and join the boards directly of the companies, or, people are angel investing, or people are just joining other boards. And in a lot of the founder-led biotechs, I haven't seen that. And so what you end up getting is some companies over-index on whatever their earlier investors thought was important, right? So you go out and you raise a seed round from a seed investor who's impressed by your animal data. And so then they're on your board. And then you go out and you're like, okay, well, they're impressed by this animal data. Let's make some more exciting animal data. And you understand that at the end of the day, if you are a biotech company, if you are a drug development company, I should say, your job is to bring drugs to patients. Full stop. That's it. Your job is not to make a lot of mice happier than however they were. Your job is not to generate really cool data sets of animals or in vitro or anything like that. Your job is to bring drugs, get them into patients, get the data from that, and inform yourself on how your drugs are going to move forward or if you're going to make new drugs. And I think there's a disconnect between that, where we've seen a lot of companies just like continue, they're 5, 6, 7 years old and they don't have development candidates, right? They don't have, at the end of the day, platform or not, your platform needs to create a pipeline asset, and that pipeline asset needs to go into patients. And
so, and you earn the right to make more assets after that with your platform.
You earn the right to make. So there's a piece of it which is like, you can disrupt the biotech model and you can try to do new things. I think people should do bolder things. I think we need more capital backing people who are like, let's break this model a little bit. Let's try something different. Let's incorporate things differently. But at the same time, you need to understand what your business model is. You are a business, unless you want to build a research institute, a nonprofit research institute, which you're more than welcome to do as well. But your job as a biotech company that develops drugs is to develop those drugs. And so,
do you think people like lose sight of that because they love their technology too much, or they're?
I mean, cool science gets everyone excited. I mean, animal data still makes me excited. When I see something cool that we've done in some animal model or organoid model, organ on a chip, I see that data all the time and I go, oh my God, this is so cool. And right now, the weirdest part about the position I am in at Strand is like, I see new clinical data come out and that excites me because we're really helping real people. But I'm still looking at this, the research data that we're doing, and that excites me because it tells me where our science is going into the future. But the animal data and this research data, like every time we reevaluate what we are investing in, it is about how is this becoming a drug, or how is it becoming an aspect of a drug that we're going to put into patients? Because there's just, our model does not allow for us to do science for the sake of science. There's lots of great people. We have, academic founders, and I have lots of friends who are professors.
A lot of other places to do that.
A lot of other places to do that. But it's not ours. I think people lose sight of what they are building because they're building what has rewarded them in the past.
Yeah. It feels like you've deeply kind of internalized this. I'm guessing you didn't sort of have this strong of a view and sort of intuition for this when you started Strand. Like, at what point did you like really feel like it clicked what the business of drug development is? Like, was there any like kind of rude awakening for you or something a year or two into Strand where you realized everything you just said to me?
I think it was...
Because they definitely don't teach you that in grad school.
No, they don't teach you any of that. I think for me, it came from like our first drug was so... It was built to be this like first proof of concept, right? It's similar to drugs that like Moderna has tried and BioNTech had tried and Translate and CureVac. They tried similar approaches to this, and our other people had tried cytokine-based therapies, and our piece was more potent, more specific, programmed messenger RNAs. Like the approach isn't wrong. Scientifically, it's valid, right? All these companies wouldn't have tried it if it wasn't a good scientific shot on goal. But the question became, why didn't it work? And we wanted to show that with our technology. The other piece was this fundamental belief that we were onto something right, and the data convincing me, other people not being convinced by it, and me just saying, okay, there's one way to show this, and that is just get into patients. Just get this drug to patients. And, you think about this now, like, we've hit delays. Obviously, we had supply chain delays, manufacturing delays, all these things that happened because of COVID and just other, getting your first drug approved by the FDA to start a clinical trial. All of that stuff sort of gets in. And I've always said, like, speed is the message. Our very first patient we got to just in time, right? Mm-hmm. Now over a year in to, they were supposed to go to hospice last summer, and over a year in, they're almost disease-free.
That's unbelievable.
And they're still on the trial here 13, 14 months in.
Your team must be so proud.
And we are so proud. That's a positive way to look at it. And we got to that patient just in time. But the reason that it's so important to keep that hammer down is, like, if your drug is effective and you should only be working on something that you think will be effective, right? That means every time you are delayed, every time you're slowed down, every time it doesn't get to patients is an amount of time that someone's mother, father, brother, sister, whatever, is going to miss an opportunity for that drug. And so that's been my mantra. I think my tagline on LinkedIn is making medicine move faster. And I think that we're still not doing good enough. Us as a company, us as an industry, us
it takes way too
as
long.
A country, it takes way too long. And we have to think about ways to get things to patients more because, in the meantime, people are dying, people are suffering, and we just have to do better.
Absolutely. I want to come back to something you brought up earlier with sort of just biomanufacturing. Biomanufacturing is a big topic these days. I actually heard you were working to revitalize the area you grew up in. You mentioned you grew up in rural Illinois. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Peoria, which actually has roots in penicillin production, which I thought was really interesting. And you're trying to help revitalize it into a modern biomanufacturing hub. What sparked that effort, and what were some of the big lessons and wins?
So I am all in on reshoring biomanufacturing to the United States. I think that it's embarrassing the level of critical technologies that we don't manufacture here in the United States as the quote unquote global superpower, and medicines being one of no.
Sure, right? It's like a national security issue that you don't have control of your own medicine supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, we manufacture no non-targeted antibiotics, no broad spectrum antibiotics in the United States.
Okay.
No, we manufacture zero. We manufacture none of the critical components that go into the COVID vaccine. We manufacture almost none of the COVID vaccines. We manufacture very little of any genetic medicine components, and we manufacture very little biologics here in the United States. And all of the biologics, 7 of the top 10 best-selling drugs in the world are biologics, and we manufacture, I think, less than 10% of the market share here in the United States, but we buy over 50% of them. And so
this isn't like, hey, we must just for the sake of it manufacture them here. It's actually critical to the health of the United States population, at least some control over the supply chain of life-saving medicines.
I think imagine a world in which COVID is 10 times as deadly as it was, right?
Every country is going to prioritize themselves.
Hardcore lockdowns happened during COVID, and there was a very serious lethality associated with the COVID virus. Imagine either man-made or natural occurring pandemic that hits the same way, and how fast supply chains constrict, now imagine that there's something in a global conflict or some sort of global peace or rupture in the peace globally, and either it becomes harder to import things, or a lot of this is coming from China and Southeast Asia. And so as a country that is apparently the global leader, the powerhouse of the world, or whatever you want to call America.
Backup plan.
We don't have any of the capacity. And so one of the things that I hit on, so I grew up in a small farm town, about 1,800 people, about 25 minutes outside of a Midwestern city called Peoria. Peoria was a once great, it's a lovely Midwestern town, but it used to be it's where Caterpillar Tractors is headquartered.
Okay. Yeah.
That's actually the last company to be founded in Peoria to IPO in 1911. And so
1911 founding.
1911 founding, I
Okay.
think IPO in like 1915 or 1917 or something.
Okay.
And they've been building tractors. They actually moved their executive headquarters, I think, up to the Chicago suburbs a couple of years ago. But it's, they did their manufacturing and they really ran Peoria. Peoria also used to be pre-prohibition the number one tax revenue city in America because almost all of the ethanol for actual alcohol was made there. And now they just make ethanol. They still make ethanol, but mostly for fuel subsidy because there's a lot of corn and there's a river.
Okay,
and
so there's some good fermentation capacity over there.
There's great and they discovered how to mass produce penicillin during World War II at a USDA research site that's there in Peoria. And so there's this history of advanced manufacturing for Caterpillar and Komatsu's there as well now. But there's all of this empty, it's like most Midwestern cities, it's been adversely hollowed out by globalization and as manufacturing has left. And so as I was walking through downtown Peoria, Christmas 2019, I was home. I had started Strand. I was meeting with the then mayor of Peoria, who's just a family friend. It's not that big of a place. And talking to him about Peoria, talking to him about places that they could grow and looking at this like hollowed out manufacturing infrastructure and thinking, why not here? And why not? And Peoria doesn't have to be, Peoria is one of about 120 cities, I think, in the United States that you could utilize capacity that exists today to reshore all sorts of manufacturing technologies. We have sort of the hollowed bones of these manufacturing initiatives, but we will have to relearn how to make some of these things. And we could leverage things like automation and AI. And so with an organization I started called Peoria Biomade, which was done when I was, again, stuck in my house during the pandemic. And I was thinking, what else can I do?
Didn't have enough to work on with one company.
I didn't have enough to work on. So I started this foundation and I started working with folks to think about what would biomanufacturing in Peoria look like, just as a test case, right? We worked out the economics of it and it looks pretty great actually. What it's going to take and what Peoria and many other cities are going to take to be advanced manufacturing juggernauts like they were 50 years ago in the United States is going to be continued investment from the federal government, continued investment from the state governments, and continued investment in openness to that investment from companies. And I think you can begin to incentivize companies in both, carrot and stick ways, right? You can reward them for doing that manufacturing. You can, of course, the current president has taken a lot of, sticks to people not manufacturing domestically. I think both, you should apply that policy at both ends. And it helps to incentivize that and reshore this very important critical technology. I mean, there's a laundry list of critical technologies we do need to reshore if we're going to be this, very strong country going forward.
How do you see the state of biomanufacturing today? Like, have we made progress since Christmas 2019?
No, unfortunately. I think that you just look at what happened. We definitely manufactured more COVID vaccines during COVID, and that was, the government dumping money in to solve the problem as an emergency. I think that we're beginning to see the signs, right? We're seeing some pharma companies as well as biotech companies announce more biomanufacturing in the United States. I think that we still are lacking both raw material production for these aren't like smelted steel, right? This is, those critical components for like lipid nanoparticles, for instance. We're lacking a lot of raw material production, which is going to take like large investment, probably from something like a state actor like the federal government. And we're missing early stage manufacturing, right? And so the problem with early stage, phase one manufacturing, the problem with it is that it's just so low margin for a large player. There's regulatory reforms that I think need to come forward, which would allow first, like lowering the FDA's burden from a CMC, from a manufacturing perspective and regulations over manufacturing for first in human studies, right? Sure. Understanding that like it doesn't need to have all the bells and whistles and analytics if we're talking about like just testing out a drug in a human for the first time who is out of options, right? We're trying to get to that person
already
faster.
In hospice,
right? Because, both from the patient perspective, they need the drug sooner than later. And if the drug doesn't get there in time, then they could, suffer or die. And from the company perspective, the faster you get to that answer, the faster the investment capital can flow to get you to the next stage. Yep. And so if you lower those CMC requirements and then you combine that with an incentive to manufacture here in the United States, whether that's regulatory, whether it's commercial, commercial, like how you build your carrot and stick models from the US government's perspective. There's a lot of different options. And then on top of all of that, you couple it with companies, I think, returning to a patriotic sense of building, right? You should build in America, right? Why are any of us building these startup companies here in America? Because I think America as a country is a land of opportunity. I was born here. I feel very blessed, and I feel that this is a place that's great to build companies. I founded a company with someone who's on an O1 visa, right? A Japanese citizen, and together we both believe that America has this opportunity. I think that is not just an opportunity for us; it's an obligation for us to continue this patriotic belief, I guess.
Absolutely. Let's talk more about policy. So you were formerly a science and technology advisor to the Massachusetts State Legislature. What else do we need government to be doing today to help focus today with science? And imagine you're in charge. Like, what would you do first?
So if we're talking about biotech, right?
Yeah.
I think biotech needs what we call, both in the state level, but really at the federal level, the 3 R's, right? And that's they need risk capital, they need access to revenue, and they need regulatory reforms, right? And so risk capital is early stage. How do you get an idea off a lab bench into something that is translatable, ideally into first in human? Revenue is, there's an incredibly long lag between how long you have to put money into an idea and then when you can actually sell that drug, right?
Sure.
And so companies, biotech companies, drug development companies are suffering because they can't get drugs to a commercial stage, and thus they have to accept, M&A, different sorts of partnerships, and pharmas come in, and that's their, you essentially make a biotech industry which has become a outsourced research agency for pharma. And then finally, regulatory reforms. We talked about a few of them.
Are you thinking on the revenue side, like sort of guaranteed purchase agreements, things like that? Like, hey, you make a viable option for this unmet need, and like the government will underwrite this much revenue for you, which kind of is what happened during COVID.
It's exactly what happened during COVID.
Yeah.
Well, what happened during COVID was actually the 3 R's, right? The regulatory was cleared out of all the bureaucracy. There was regular conversation between the FDA and the companies and the researchers and the clinicians and everyone talking, like you could get feedback immediately. There was risk capital provided by the government early on that flew money into not just Moderna, but a number of companies taking shots on goal to try to solve the COVID pandemic. And then finally, there was revenue, which was like, yes, if you get to XYZ position, we're going to make these purchase agreements. And so, whether that is in the form of these like grand challenges or moonshots, whatever you want to call them, prize monies that people can get to, whether it is, at a certain point of, overcoming a phase 2 proof of efficacy study that allows Medicare and Medicaid to step in and say, hey, we're actually going to buy $100 million of this drug, pre-buy it. We're going to have we're going to pay 70% of your eventual commercial price because we're ordering it, or we're early ordering. And then, that allows a company to access revenues earlier. That can be transformative for a company that's trying to bridge the gap between a proof of concept to rigorous data that convinces the FDA that they can, and then also fund a commercial launch. And it helps investors underwrite an investment.
Totally. I mean, I'm sure everyone looks back and thinks Operation Warp Speed was a great deal for the world.
Why medicine is the best investment we make in healthcare is because it's a mortgage and not a rent,
Yeah.
right? Because
It's deflationary.
all medicine goes generic, right? And so like, statins are a great example. Obviously Lipitor, very expensive drug when it came out. It decreased spending by trillions of dollars on heart disease and early deaths of people because statins obviously were a huge success for decreasing cardiovascular risk.
Totally. It's
And
cheap as running water.
Now statins, because they're off patent and they're generic, are basically a free drug. So you pay for the patent period, which is usually, at most about 13 years. And after that, you have this like free drug. It's an incredible investment. Whereas a knee surgery today is going to be 3 times as much 10 years from now.
Totally.
And maybe more, right? But if you create a drug that decreases the need for knee surgeries, you pay for it for 10 years and then it's free.
It's amazing. So you've been involved in policy a while. Even in grad school, you were part of MIT's Science Policy Initiative. What drew you to participate, and what do you think the public's biggest misconception is about scientific research? And if you want, any comments on the current stance towards academic research?
Your research team really did a good deep dive. I was looking at all of this, and it has everything. I think that that scientists need to have regular dialogue with elected officials. We need more scientists to run for office. There are, I think there's one scientific PhD out of 437 members of Congress.
Really?
And there's
Wow.
23 members of Congress whose highest degree is a high school diploma or a GED. That's not a judgment on people who only have a high school diploma or a GED. That's the highest level of education that my father has.
I dropped out of college.
I
feel called out right now.
No. It totally fine. I just think that balance, is more about the juxtaposition of that. One scientific PhD out of 437 is less than 0.25% of Congress is represented by actual scientists. Now, there's a number of MDs that are in Congress. I think that we need more scientists to just run for office to represent like the various different aspects. And science, as you know, is not one thing, right? It's a bunch of different types of people. I think at the same time, scientists, and whether you're a startup executive, whether you're an academic, if you do research, if you're at the forefront of discovery in any sort of a way, I think you have an obligation to communicate that, not just to your peers, but you should be trying to communicate that to others. Because what I think is happening, what I think happened with the Inflation Reduction Act and its sort of drug pricing regulation that got into that bill, and what I think is happening now within various different calls to cut funding within the federal government, I think it all stems from a lack of understanding of what exactly scientists are doing. And it becomes very easy to pick up from a pile of grants a grant that sounds ridiculous, right? There was 10 years ago when I was in the Science Policy Initiative, there was a congressman from Texas who was famous for digging through these grants, finding ones that sounded the most ridiculous, like $1 million to study shrimp walking. And
sounds like a Rand Paul
thing. He would give these, it wasn't Rand Paul, and his name is escaping me right now, but I remember he was the chairman, he was a GOP member from Texas. He was the chairman of the House Science Committee, the committee that oversees the NSF, and he was just went on the attack of like all of these, if you pull things out of context, sometimes you go, $1 million to study how shrimp are walking. But you go into the fine print and you understand they were studying Gulf shrimp and the impact of the Gulf oil spill on shrimp mobility for how we could better recapitulate those fisheries so that you could return business to the Gulf states, which are also red states, right?
Yeah.
And his own state of Texas. But it becomes very easy to make science sound ridiculous when taken out of context. And
overly complicated and obfuscated.
Overly complicated. I think part of the blame does rely on scientists. I believe that not everyone needs to be as involved as I try to be of being a resource for, either members in Congress or their staff. But I do believe that scientists, the age of trust me, I'm a scientist, I think we should all know is very well
that's
gone.
Long gone.
But it's been gone for a long time. And you don't get credit when an emergency happens and you show up and you say, I'm the scientist, trust me now, you get credit over time when you explain things to people, when you help people understand, because at the end of the day, everyone wants, I don't know anyone who's like, I don't want cancer to be cured. I don't know anyone that says, I love Alzheimer's. I just don't know where that comes from. No one thinks that, but there are people who are pro cutting certain programs that can go to help, those sorts of research. And it behooves us to be better communicators. And I feel very passionately about that. And I try to go and lend my voice at least. But I wish there were more, I go down to DC and I'll chat with like a congressman, for instance, or congresswoman, and I'll just, be explaining something to them. And they're like, wow, about drug prices or how drug development or how biotech is different from pharma, for instance, and explaining something that is like very simple, right? And they'll be like, wow, I just had no idea. And I was like, well, when's the last time you spoke to someone from? Never.
No one comes and talks to them.
You know who comes and talks? The insurance companies.
They're
lobbyists.
Pretty good
Their
at
lobbyists are here every day, and they're explaining that drug prices are driving up the cost of healthcare.
Yeah.
And we have to get.
It is a shame the industry is not better at sort of telling its story and lobbying. Like this should be a thing that's like the industry should be celebrated for, curing, vaccinating against COVID and things like that.
Again, I think it falls on us, right? Because we don't tell our stories. If you look at the biotech drug development industry, we don't tell our story. And our story is one where the best analogy I've heard of this is you watch the Super Bowl not to get the final score. If you want the final score of the Super Bowl, you will get it. It will be in the news the next day. You don't watch the Super Bowl to see the final score. You watch the Super Bowl to see how you got to the final score, right? You follow SpaceX as they launch rockets and as they crash and as they succeed because you're along for the journey, right? And as an industry, drug development and the quest to cure diseases and help patients, we don't take people outside of our bubble along for the journey. We don't show them the people who are trying to make these things happen and the failures that happen and the multi-year investments and people who invest a decade of their life just to fail a phase 3 trial at the end of the day and the heartbreak that comes from that and how you pick yourself back up and how we continuously, relentlessly try to stop disease. We don't take the general public along for that journey.
Oh, I'm sure the average citizen has no idea.
I think people don't hear it as much. I love, you're at least you're doing media here and having people in to talk about science, hopefully in a way that reaches folks outside of our own bubble of science. But I think that we really need to explain, like, just take people along for the journey. They want to hear it. I mean, my family, I come from, no hardcore scientists in my family. My dad sells pagers, beepers, and my mom was a public high school special ed teacher. So there's not like, some huge science base within my family. But people love hearing, like, as I've been building Strand and as we've taken the drugs and now put them into patients, like, they love being along for that journey. Not just because it's me and I'm their son, but like they want to hear how the science is doing. And I think the general public wants to hear it. It's on us to tell that story better.
Absolutely. There's a bunch of challenges that come with developing a new modality, working with mRNA medicines, regulatory approvals, manufacturing, public sentiment. We've talked about a couple of them, but any other like big unexpected hurdles trying to make an mRNA medicine?
More so than, not just mRNA or genetic medicine. I think like the capital requirements on companies is super hard, right? You're not making any money. Biotech companies professionally set money on fire, hoping that the warmth of the fire will be worth more than the money that it fueled it. You essentially are constantly spending money hoping you get to the other side of something, and it's really that's of course very challenging. The markets for both biotech and then broader have been very challenging for risk capital here. I think. That at the end of the day, it's just that every day is a new challenge, right? I think every year of Strand we've been in operations now since we hired our first employee for about 6.5 years. And every year it's a different company.
Yeah.
It's a different company. There's different people, there's different challenges, there's different stuff. And the different company actually needs a different CEO. So you
got to grow yourself. Yeah.
I either have to grow into that position or I need to get out of the way for whoever can do the job, right? And I think that like the first year of graduate school, for instance, right? You do a PhD program. The first year of graduate school, you're like drinking from a fire hose and trying not to drown. And then your second year, you like catch your breath and you're still learning. And this learning curve approaches this asymptote by like the third or fourth year of graduate school. You're not really learning new skills. You're just kind of turning the crank, trying to get the data out so you can write your thesis and get your PhD. And every year of being the CEO of Strand has been like the first year of graduate school. And it's like every time
wishing there'd be an asymptote.
you're just like, one of these years I would really like, just it to be the same. Yeah. I think that, the thing about being a founder for folks who might be listening who are thinking about going into this is like, you have to love that constant learn and development. Like you have to lean into it. You have to constantly change. You have to, be better at the things you had to do the year before, but then you have to acquire new skills. You have to meet new people. It's an always on sort of scenario. And so I think I didn't fully appreciate that, right? I mean, there's a lie that founders tell themselves all
it'll
the time.
Get easier.
Yeah, it'll get easy. Once we close this round, once we do that, once we get that piece of data, once we have that customer, right? Oh, and, I talked to, I won't necessarily name his name, but people who know might be able to figure it out. I talked to a founder, current executive of a large drug development company who's still running the company this day, like 30 years later. And I said,
not many of those.
Yeah, not many of them. And I said, when when does it get easier, and how have you managed it? And he goes, it's challenging every year. And I was just like, wow. It's just like, which is fine. I think at this point, a couple years in, it was like, okay, maybe this will be it. Maybe this will be it. And then we'll get over this, and then I'll take a breath. I think at this point I've just come to embrace, like, this is life, and
it's the journey. Yeah.
I do love it. So it's fine. But I think that, maybe people need to know what they're getting into. I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into, but
I think a lot of people, that's probably the beauty of naivety, is like, you probably wouldn't do it if you knew how hard it was. So it's good for society that you didn't know how hard it was, because now you're doing it. Let's talk about co-founders. Your co-founder was your postdoc mentor.
So he was a postdoc and was my mentor as a graduate student.
Okay. Yeah. Today you're CEO, he's president. Like, how do you divide up the responsibilities? Talk to me about your co-founder relationship. How do you decide to work together?
So I met Tasuku first week of graduate school. I was talking to Ron Weiss, who was my PhD advisor, and talking to him about what I was interested in genetic medicines, and he sort of recommended that I talk to this postdoc. We actually went out and found him in the lab, and Tasuku is the smartest scientist I've ever worked with in my life. He's unbelievably intelligent and insightful into areas of science and science adjacent fields, and even other sorts of technical stuff like legal languages. I mean, everything. He's a true polymath, and his ability to hold information in his head. If he was here right now, you could just name probably a oncology clinical trial from 2017, and he'll just be like, oh, well, thought the ORR was a little lower, and I was surprised they got approval, but the safety was really clean, so maybe that's why. He just like says things like that. You're like, oh my, where is that in your brain? And so, when I first came to MIT, he was a postdoc. He was about a year into his postdoc, and he had started this RNA research group within Ron's lab, and we started working together, and it was great. We were very intense people. He's super intense. He would sleep in the lab. I would sleep in the lab sometimes. He would sleep in the lab almost every day. He lived 3 blocks down the street in a crappy apartment so he could be closer to lab. And
obsession.
We were obsessed with science. But he taught me a lot. I mean, he taught me how to molecularly clone. I hadn't done any molecular biology in undergrad. I'd worked all on nanoparticles.
You hadn't done any cloning?
I didn't even know how to clone. I didn't even know how to do a mini prep.
Oh, wow.
He trained me at 22 when I was 22, and he was, I don't know, a postdoc. He showed me how to do a mini prep, how to submit sequencing. I mean, that level of like early stuff, and then all the way through like how to be a good scientist, how to work on things, how to organize yourself. And we worked together for a number of years. We wrote some papers together. He actually left the lab to chase this girl to Europe. This girl who had been in our lab for a little bit, and he moved to Europe to be closer to her. They're now married. They have multiple
I didn't
kids.
want to ask and
no.
Not be the case.
It was a very mutual chase. It wasn't chasing. It was she was in Europe and he wanted to go find her. But he went and worked at a hedge fund, because in Belgium there was no. There were no biotech jobs that or academic jobs that he either could get or wanted to get or were right. And so he ended up working at this hedge fund, which is where he started to see some insight into how our technology could be leveraged. And we kept talking. We were talking through all this. We were writing a paper together. And, he got to saying, like, have you been following phase 2 oncology clinical trials? And I was like, absolutely not. No, I'm in graduate school. I'm just trying to be done.
In all my free time.
Saturday afternoon, just flipping through recent trial releases and ASCO abstracts. So we start talking, and he starts, he's highlighting a few things, and that's, kind of how we ended up going down, this rabbit hole and how this could become a company. And then we started it. And I think that early on, my business card, because I've only ever had business cards printed once, because less than a year into the company operating, the pandemic happened. Yeah. And so we just never used them again. Our business cards both say co-founder under them, because that's all we were early on. We hadn't even given ourselves roles. And I remember being in San Francisco, going to a number of investors' office, and one investor I knew pretty well pulled me aside after the meeting, and he was like, you got to tell people what you're doing in this company. You can't just be co-founder. Like, who am I investing in? Who is what, and what are you going to do? And so we had this conversation around like, what are our skill sets, and how can we build that? And he is the greatest, like I said, the greatest scientist I've ever worked with. And he is a great scientific leader in terms of running. So he can think about complex scientific topics and then build a team underneath and build all of the different innovations that you need to work on all the way down to the lowest level. And so we knew that he would be very internally focused as a leader, as a scientist, as everything. And so whereas I think that it was probably clear even back then that I was a little more communication oriented between the two of us,
Sounds
and
like
not
a good
as
division
good
of labor,
and not as good of a scientist. And so I wanted to build a company, an environment where we could unleash his scientific creativity. Right? It was like, how do I harness? How do I give the resources to this genius to go out and do great science in this shared vision that we have for what the future of genetic medicines is?
I love that.
And so that's what I was like, I'm going to be externally focused. I will talk to investors. We'll do this. And that is a CEO's job. And then internally at the company, and, we have 100-something employees now at our headquarters, not far from here. And inside that, the organization, I think you could probably see we almost run it as co-CEOs, where, we have different levels of leadership that we equally share.
That's awesome. Any like lessons about keeping a strong co-founder relationship that you want to impart on founders? I think a lot of people don't think about how critical that relationship is to the company's success when they start, because there's no way you could know.
Yeah, I mean, we had the benefit of having 6 years of working experience but beforehand. I mean, that's obviously not, if that was required, there would be no startups. That's an insane prerequisite. I think it was helpful for us because there's a lot of trust in that. And so what we would do, what I think is just being able to, like, this mutual respect and a mutual trust, not just trust that this person's not going to screw me over, but trust that, like, we are aligned on what we are trying to build here. And we are trying to build the best version of whatever that is we're building, and understanding how you can communicate that to each other. Because I think that, like, the two of us can be very blunt with each other. Like, just, sometimes I'll just fire off a text and be like, this is the stupidest that I, like, something comes up. I'm like, we're not going to do this. This is so dumb.
Yeah.
And like, I don't want to do this. I want to like stop, or, this was a miss. We shouldn't have done this, or this is going to come back to bite us in the ass. Or like, why are we doing that? And just like being not disrespectful and not personal, but like understanding we have a relationship where we can be very blunt and understand that, like, the both of us, I do not want his job. He does not want my job. We are not trying to compete for any sort of influence. It's just trying to make a better company.
Yeah.
And I think that level of alignment and that level of, like, let's all move this collective ball forward together, is just critical for a well-functioning team. And it allows you to rely on another person through a very difficult journey that is building any company.
Yeah, true partnership. Let's talk about your personal life. Congrats on having your first kid this year. Yeah. Because you need more things to do. How has becoming a parent shifted how you run Strand?
So, I mean, I imagine this is probably the same thing for any new parent, but for me, it really crystallizes the need and the importance of time management.
I heard parents get very good at focusing and prioritizing.
Yeah, and the thing about a kid is, while I can lie to myself about the company and be like, if I just get this done, then it'll all free up. And you and I have been running companies long enough to know that's a lie that helps us.
Yeah, it's coping
it's
mechanism.
a coping mechanism that helps us get through that. But unfortunately, if I take 3 months to solve that one problem, and then we get to the other side, and obviously things don't let up, but whatever, the heat of the moment lets up, I've missed 3 months of my son. That's a different kid. Your children. So I had my son in March of last year. And so he just turned 16 months. And every month to 2 months, it's like, it's the same kid, he's same personality, but he's, he acquires new skills, and other things he stops doing. Sometimes there are things you don't like waking up through the night and crying. And sometimes there are things that like literally loved, right? It's like, things he did as a baby and how he scrunched up in things. And then one day he just doesn't do them anymore. And it's like, that's true for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in life, there's this quote that I've heard a number of times, which is like, one day you were out riding bikes with your friends and you were chasing zombies on your bike, playing pretend. And you came inside and you put your bike away and you went inside your house and you never went outside and played again.
It was the last time you did that. Yeah.
It's the last time you ever did it, and you didn't know it in the moment. And having a kid is like that a lot. And so for me, what it's really refined, not only is time management, but how present I want to be in my personal life. Now, I work crazy hard. I work all the time in various different ways, and I have a wonderful team behind me. But there is no substitute for that, right? My son is going to have 1/16th month, right? He's going to have 1/17th month in life. And so it's just helped me understand, like, maybe how to better enjoy my personal life while I'm on this journey, because I want to build this company to last. I want to build an enduring generational biotech company. And that means, like, I'm not pushing for an M&A next year or trying to flip some data sets so I can buy a house in Nantucket or something. I'm trying to build something that's sustainable. And then that means my personal life sort of needs to be at a level of sustainable that is okay for me. And for me, that's, making sure that there's time to smell the roses or smell the poopy diapers.
Work-life integration.
Exactly. That is it, right?
I heard you gave the commencement speech last year at your alma mater, UIUC. What did you tell them?
So the University of Illinois, where I did my bachelor's degree, like is such an incredible university. It's a state school in a mostly very rural state with also Chicago and the Chicago suburbs, and it's a top 5 engineering program in this state school that has in-state tuition if you live in Illinois, and even the out-of-state tuition is not egregious, and this incredible resource where I felt like I went from the cornfields I grew up in, and less than an hour and a half down the interstate, and all of a sudden there was this like mecca of scientific research that was like,
that's where the internet got invented,
right? Yeah, there's supercomputers there, and there's quantum computing there now, and all sorts of really crazy stuff is going on there, and great research, and that's where I learned how to be a researcher. And so I think that, like, for me, the message that I wanted to convey to the graduates of the University of Illinois is to say that this is the university is this ultimate resource, this ultimate gift that you've all been given. This for most of those graduates, they're in-state students or international students, and so for those of you that are in-state, it's a gift that is here, and it's made you who you are today at your graduation. But no one cares. In a year from now, in 5 years from now, no one's going to care who you were today, right? What you need to understand is that, like, every day is this fresh day. Not that you need to reinvent yourself, but your GPA defines yourself for exactly maybe one job application. And if you go to your second job application after that, and they're still asking for your college GPA, you should probably apply to a different job, right? And so it's just about starting. One of the things I said was, you can also just do things. Like,
it's a very popular meme in the Valley right now.
It's really gotten popular, and I can't remember if I had seen it on Twitter beforehand before I gave the announcement.
Yeah.
But I truly believe it, because it was something that I used to think about when I was starting my company, and a number of my classmates at MIT were like, "What the fuck are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
Like, get a venture job. If you want to go into startups, just get a venture job like a normal person. Like, why are you starting a biotech? Why you're not even the smartest kid in our class. Like, there's 20 of us, and you're not the smartest. You're not even the top 5. Yeah. Like, why do you think you can start a company?
You just do things.
And I was like, I don't know, but like, we're just gonna do it, right? We're just gonna keep nonstop, keep the pedal down. There's that old Woodrow Wilson quote, right? That like nothing will take the place of persistence, right? Talent cannot, right? There's no shortage of talented men or women with nothing to show for it, right? Persistence is the key. And so that was the message that in a more eloquent way I tried to deliver to these students, and to say like, yeah, you're not coming from MIT, you're not coming from Stanford, to understand that University of Illinois is an incredible school. By graduating there, you deserve to be on a stage with any other university out there in the United States, any other place in the world, and you can just go do things. Yeah, you're not a Stanford undergraduate or a Stanford dropout that might, believe that by getting into Stanford or dropping out of Stanford that you're the next Steve Jobs, and that's wonderful too if that's who you are and you're going to go to Stanford or drop out of there. But I think that for kids coming from the University of Illinois who have grown up in the Midwest, which seems like a place that has sort of been forgotten by the coast to a certain extent, that you can just go out and do things. That amazing people have come from that university and gone out and done things.
I like that. It's a message of you already have permission. Don't worry about it.
You already have permission.
Yeah. Thanks, Jake.
Yeah.
Let's. I got a couple fun questions to wrap things up now.
Awesome.
Lightning round. Just rapid fire. Say the first thing that comes to mind. There's no wrong answers. Most game-changing medicine of the last 100 years.
I mean, I think it's got to be Keytruda, Opdivo, anti-PD-1s. I mean, it won the Nobel Prize. It's not a controversial statement, right? But I mean, the change in the ability to harness the immune system to fight off cancer is just extraordinary. And not only that, it opened up a world of more immunotherapies and company like the drugs that we're even developing, right? It opened up the world to say, not only can we use the immune system to fight cancer, but we should use the immune system to fight cancer, and we can now do it in a million different ways.
What's something about you that people would be surprised to learn?
I think this was written about in an article once, but my first job that I ever had, and I've only had 3, including CEO of Strand, my first job, I was in a traveling acting troupe.
Really?
Yeah. When I was 15, I was in a traveling acting troupe that was employed by the Peoria Park District. It was called the Peoria Players. And we were a 5-person cast with 2 understudies. We drove around in a van for an entire summer, essentially going all over the Midwest to do an abridged version of Aladdin. And I played Aladdin. Yeah. It's just a production piece. It's mostly for kids.
Okay.
But people would hire us to work at we'd do like big family gatherings. We did some like weird corporate events, but essentially it's just like 5 teenagers in a van and a director who's like 20 something driving us around the Midwest, and so many weird we're doing shows in like out in fields for like some family reunion. Then we do like
pre-YouTube. Any of this online?
This is it was pre everyone having a camera, right? This is 2006, summer 2006. So we're a little we're right before smartphones, luckily.
Lucky you.
That was my first job.
Wow.
And I loved it.
What's something you were obsessed with as a child?
Skateboarding.
Oh.
So I skateboarded even competitively.
Wow. Okay.
To a certain point. I mean, I was obsessed. I think skateboard culture took me more than like the actual skateboard. I mean, I love skateboarding. I skated almost every day for 6 years.
Oh, wow. Still skateboard ever?
No, I'm 33 years old, man. I'm going to hurt myself. I snowboard now instead, which is a more socially accepitable thing to do. And the snow's softer. Well,
not out here.
Not out here. Maybe out west.
Yeah.
But I was just obsessed with skateboarding. But I think it was the culture, right? The punk 2000s culture of like, I'm going to skateboard here. I think the music, the punk rock, the NoFX and all these other bands. I think that's what I liked more than skateboarding itself.
What's your favorite spot for backcountry snowboarding?
Probably the Gothics, which is a region on the like British Columbia, Alberta border.
Okay.
There's a number of lodges up there that run, all sorts of backcountry guiding. And I think that like that hits you with this nice mix of challenging terrain, deep snow, but then just like breathtaking views.
Amazing. Who should we interview next on the show?
Who should you interview next? Have you had George Church on?
No.
I think I just saw a podcast that George had done with Dorkesh, and I thought that was really well done. But I think that George, people like to ask George about science all the time, but I think, here is this like industry focused or whatever. George basically runs an institute for starting companies out of his lab. And he's probably the professor who has spawned the most founders. Like when we talk about this founder-led piece, right?
Yeah.
So many founder CEO, lots of companies get spun out of labs, some of the CRISPR labs or anything, they spin these things out. But George spins out tech with his scientists more than
understudied.
Almost anyone else.
Yeah, what's in the water there?
What's in the water at the church? I don't know. George was on my thesis committee, but I was never in his lab. But an incredible leader.
Oh, wow. So he has a little fingerprint on Strand too.
Yeah. And, if he remembers, he was the only person who asked me a question that I didn't know how to answer during my defense.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the question?
So the question was, can you draw the structure? So modified RNA is, you have these different bases.
Yeah.
And uridine is a base that, replaces thymine when DNA becomes RNA. And pseudouridine is a different version of that base that's used in modified RNA. That's one of the big changes. It's a different structure of that base. He asked me, can you draw the chemical structure of pseudouridine on the dry erase board? At which point I was like, okay, he's like taking the piss. He's just like, I mean, what? And I said, no. I was like, no, I can't draw that. And he goes, can I? And I was like,
go for it.
Sure. So he gets up, stands up, comes to the front of the room. This is in the private session, just me, four-person committee and myself in the room. And so he draws this chemical structure on the dry erase board behind the projector. And he goes, now, why do you think it's more stable? And we just, and I again, I'm like, is he fucking with me? What is this supposed to do? And so I'm like pointing at some different bonds that are different than uridine and where
you're getting stressed or like panicking a little bit.
I mean, I'm just like, what is the end goal here? I mean, there's no way they fail my PhD on this like esoteric question. Like after 6 years of work, and Strand was funded at this point. We were already funded. We had 2 employees that were at my defense, and we're sitting there. I'm like, there's no way they fail me on this, but like, what the is he asking me this for? And like we get done, and it ends like this brainstorming session, and it ends with him going, that's interesting. And he just sits back there. He didn't have an answer. I think he just wanted us to brainstorm this question he had. And it was such a, I have lots of friends who were in his lab at this point and people who have started companies with him. And the more I've learned, it's like, that's just kind of who George is. He's just very curious. He's not trying to dig anything in you. He just probably wants to sit there and have like a brainstorming session on why pseudouridine is more stable than regular uridine. And that's what we did.
That's amazing. Jake, thanks so much for such a good conversation. I had so much fun.
I had a really great time, man. Thanks for having me here.